For this lesson, I'm working with the project file 0401 working with image files. And you can find that project file with the media associated with this lesson. Just double-click on the project file to open it in Premiere Pro. It's likely you'll want to incorporate still images and graphics in your projects. It's easy to work with this kind of material in Premiere Pro. Let's dive in and take a look. I'm going to the Media Browser panel, where I've already browsed in my storage to the media files associated with this project. But what I'm really interested in is this folder full of 1280 by 720 photos. I'm going to double click to open up that folder, and let's choose one of these. I'll right click on the photo I want and choose Import. The photo appears in my project panel, and I can double click to open it in the source monitor, or I can switch to icon view and just view it as a thumbnail. In any case, I'm going to drag this straight into my sequence. I'll put that at the end of the video clip. It's pretty short. I'm going to zoom in a little bit using the navigator at the bottom of the timeline panel. And I can see, looking at the bottom right corner of the source monitor, it's a 5-second clip. We're seeing here at 30 frames per second. This is 4 seconds and 29 frames. The last frame makes it 5. To change the duration that a still image plays for, you can click on the end of the clip and drag to any length you like. You'll notice, if I just hold on to the mouse button for a moment, I'm getting an indication of how much I'm adjusting the duration and what the new total duration will be. I'll just click to line up the playhead so we can see the image in our sequence. Now what we're looking at here is a regular still image. In fact, it's a JPEG. But if I go back to the media browser and go into my media files, I've got a multi-layer Photoshop document here that I'm going to import as well. When you import a Photoshop document, an additional dialog comes up. Up at the top, I can choose Import As, and if I choose Individual Layers, I can turn off and on the checkboxes for the layers that I want. I'm going to choose Merge All Layers, and click OK. And there it is in the project panel. Once again, I can double click to open it in the source monitor, and I can drag this into the timeline right after the existing photo. And there it is. I'm going to drag along a little bit in the sequence here to get a gap in the timeline and go back to the media browser and back into that 1280 by 720 folder. I'm going to select the rest of these photos. I'm just holding the Shift key down to make a list selection, and I'm going to drag them straight into the sequence from the media browser, all 4 of them. When I do that, you'll notice back in the project panel, all of those photos have also been added to my project. Like all of the images we've imported so far, these have a 5-second duration. So I'm going to undo and undo again, so they're no longer in the project. And I'm going to make a change to a preference. Here in Windows, I'm going to go to the Edit menu and choose Preferences and Timeline. This would be under the Premiere Pro menu in macOS. Here in this preference, you can see I've got the option to specify the default still image duration. I'm going to set this to 2 seconds, and I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to go back to the media browser. I'm going to take those 4 images and pull them in again, and right away you can see they now have a 2-second duration. Remember, of course, you can change the duration to anything you want, but this can be a useful workflow if you've got a lot of images to work with. Importing image files is the same as importing video clips. The main difference is that Premiere Pro needs to know how long to play them for. You can edit them into sequences and work with them just as you would any other clip. For this lesson, I'm working with the 0402 Create a New Title project file. You can find that project file with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. Let's create a title using the Graphics workspace. I'm clicking on Graphics at the top of the screen, and just to be on the safe side, I'll click on the Panel menu and choose Reset to Save Layout. The Essential Graphics panel has 2 tabs, Browse and Edit. There's not much for us to do in the Edit tab just yet, so let's start in Browse. Here we can see a long list of pre-built graphics that we can choose to incorporate into our sequence. I'm going to take this basic lower third, and I'm going to drag this on top of the clip we have in this sequence. If a dialog pops up advising you to use Typekit to install a missing font, just make sure you're online, put a check in the box to sync from Typekit, and click Sync Fonts. The font will be installed and you'll be ready to go. you'll need to close the project and open it again for the font to display correctly. I'm lining up my playhead so we can see the title as well. Or I can just click on the end of the clip and drag it to make it a little bit longer. Now I'm going to select this graphic by clicking on it just once, and when I do, the Edit tab in the Essential Graphics panel becomes live automatically. I'm going to select the Type tool, and you'll notice that in this workspace, the tools for the timeline have moved up to the top of the screen. And let's edit this text. I'm going to click where it says your name here, and why not? I'll put Maxim Jago. And then let's edit the second line. I'm just going to press Ctrl A, that'll be Command A on macOS, and let's take this travelogue title. You'll notice in the Essential Graphics panel, we've got some pretty standard options for fonts and for a fill color. The fill color is the color of the text that we've got selected. And you'll notice at the top of the Essential Graphics panel, each item is a separate layer on this list. Whichever one is selected is the one you're going to edit with all of the controls in this panel. You'll notice that this T icon for the Type tool has a little tiny triangle at the bottom right hand corner of it, and that triangle indicates that it's a menu. I'm going to click and hold, and this gives me access to both the Type tool and the vertical Type tool. With that selected, I'll click at the top and I'll type in some text. Now I've typed in the word holidays, but my text is too tall, so let me just press Ctrl or Command A to select all. And under the text category of controls, where my font is, I've got a font size. I'm just going to click and drag on this blue number to make that a bit smaller. There's a slider control to do the same thing right next to it. Now you'll notice in the Tools panel here, I have a pen tool. And if I click and hold under the pen tool, I have a rectangle tool. I'm going to use that to pick out a section of the screen just like this, where my text is. Of course, this new shape appears in the Essential Graphics panel, but it's at the top of the list, which isn't much good to me. I need it under my text, so I'm going to click and drag down until it's at the bottom of the list. Now it's behind my text. I'm going to select that shape layer, as it's called, and I can either give this a fill color by clicking on the color swatch and choosing something, maybe green. I'll click OK. Or I can use this eyedropper. I'm going to click on the eyedropper, and now you can see as I drag around the interface, I'm getting different colors. Let's choose the sky color. You also have the option to add a stroke. I'll just make that a little bit bigger by clicking and dragging on the number here. There we go. And a shadow if you want. There are a number of other controls in the Essential Graphics panel. You'll find that if you select an item, either with the text tool or by going to the selection tool as I am now, you'll see you can click on each item separately. You can experiment by clicking and dragging on the controls. But I'm pretty happy with this as a start, and I'm going to go back to the editing workspace to continue working on my project. You'll notice there's a highlight on this word travelogue because I've got that item selected. I'm going to click on the background layer of the timeline panel to deselect, and I'm ready to carry on editing. It's a good idea to try out several of the templates in the Essential Graphics panel and use them as a starting point for your own designs. For this lesson, I'm using the project file 0403 Change the Size of Clips. And you can find that project file with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click to open it in Premiere Pro. Not all media that you import into your project will match the frame size of your sequence, and if your images are too big, the edges will be cropped. Premiere Pro makes it easy to change the way oversized images are handled. Let's take a look. I have a sequence here with a number of clips and images. This shot, walking on sands, is the right resolution for our sequence. But if we look here, we've got a shot that's much too big. This is a photograph, and it's common for photos to be much bigger than video resolutions. If I scroll down in our project panel to find it, here we go. It's this whale in the foreground shot. 4,272 by 2,848 pixels. It's pretty big. If I double-click to open this up, you can see the original composition. Not only is the image the wrong size, it's also the wrong shape. It's not 16 by 9 like regular HD video. In the timeline, I'm going to right-click on this clip, and I'm going to choose Set to Frame Size. This automatically resizes the image so that it fits in full in our sequence image resolution, which is, in this case, 1280 by 720 pixels. The horizon line is still off. It'd be good if we could fix that. And the image size still isn't perfect because we're getting these so-called pillar boxes on the left and right sides of the clip. That's of course because it's not 16 by 9. We've got to find some way to fix that. So I'm going to make sure the clip is selected by single clicking on it in my timeline panel. And I'm going to go to a new panel, Effect Controls. The Effect Controls panel will give you options that relate to effects for each clip that you click on, and it'll only show you the settings for one clip at a time. If you have more than one item selected, you won't see anything in the Effect Controls panel, as you can see here. In fact, you just get a warning that there are multiple clips selected. So I'm going to deselect and just choose this one well in the foreground shot. I'm going to expand these motion controls in the Effect Controls panel. And you can see we've got some pretty standard options here to change the position on screen of the shot. We can change the scale, that's the size of it, and we can rotate it. Let's begin by fixing that horizon line. I'm going to click and drag on this rotation control to get this a little more level. In fact, I can expand the rotation control and get more of a graphic interface to adjust this. And if I click and drag with the control key held down, I get a little bit more precision in the adjustment. I'm going to go for something like minus 1.4%. I think that pretty much works. Now I can use these position and scale controls to rearrange the composition. I'm going to start by clicking on the scale control and dragging to the right to make this a little bit bigger so it fills the screen. And then above that, you can see we've got a position control with two numbers. The first number is the X position. I'll drag that so you can see left and right. And the Y position, that's the up and down. So just imagine there's an X and a Y next to these controls to get a sense of what they do. We have quite a lot of other images here as well. And they're all much too big for this sequence. But luckily, if I select all of these and right-click, I can use the Set to Frame Size option for all of them in a single step. Of course, now you'll want to make those individual adjustments to get the best possible composition from each image, but this is a quick way to get started. If you work with video clips that are oversized for your sequence, you can use exactly the same technique to resize them. For this lesson, I'm using the project file 0501 trim clips on the timeline, and you'll find that project file with the media associated with this lesson. Just double-click on the file to open it in Premiere Pro. Once you have the basic structure of your edit right, you'll want to look more carefully at the precise timing of the cuts. Perfecting the timing is part of the art of video editing. Changing the part of the clip you've added to a sequence is called trimming. Let's try this. I've got a sequence open in this project, and this is a pretty reasonable edit with music, voiceover, and multiple visuals, but we want to adjust the timing. Take a look at this clip. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the timeline with the navigator here, and we can see we've got this kids rolling a tire shot. And let's say I want to make the clip shorter. I want to remove part of the clip. Probably the quickest way to do this is to click and drag on the end of the clip you want to change. You'll notice as the cursor gets close to the edge of the clip, you get a red arrow indicating that you can trim. In one step, I'm going to click and drag, and as I do, you'll notice the program monitor updates to show the last frame of the clip I'm adjusting. You can see it's changing as I drag with the mouse. On the right-hand side of the program monitor, I'm seeing the first frame of the clip after this one. This helps me to decide on the content I want to use. I'm going to release the mouse and the trim has been made. You'll notice that I've left a gap. I'll just move the playhead back so you can see that clip again. This is a perfectly good way to work, but it does leave a gap on the timeline, which kind of makes it a two-stage process. You need to deal with the gap, unless, of course, you put it there on purpose to add another clip. I should note that by clicking and dragging in a single step, it's a little bit faster to trim. If I single-click and release the mouse, I get a trim handle, and when I drag to adjust the last frame of the clip and release, the trim handle is still there. I can click on the background of the timeline to remove that trim handle. Those trim handles are useful for more advanced trimming workflows, but we don't really need them right now. Now I'm going to go over to the Tools panel, and I'm going to choose this Ripple Edit tool. I'm going to undo with Control-Z here on Windows or Command-Z on macOS a couple of times to restore the clip. Let's try this again. Now I get a yellow arrow, and as I click and drag, everything moves along the timeline. I'm just going to undo that so you can see again. Notice that all of the clips after this one are moving, and this little piece of audio down on the right is too, but not the piece of audio that's just under the end of the clip. Here we go. I'll just drag this over there. This is called our ripple trim. I'll just undo again. And now under the Ripple Edit tool in the Tools panel, you'll see we have a couple of other options. I'm going to choose the Rolling Edit tool, and again we get a different cursor, and this type of trim is going to adjust both clips at once. So as I drag, you'll notice in the program monitor both the left and right sides are being adjusted. In fact, the rolling edit will extend one clip and shorten the other by exactly the same amount. And this means your sequence won't get longer or shorter. I'll just release the mouse and you can see the trim has been made. I'm going to click and drag again here so you can see there's a limit to how far I can move this trim. You see as I'm dragging left, the handles get left behind, and that's because there's no more media left in that forest shot. I'm going to go back to the selection tool. I'm going to line up my playhead, and I'm going to use another shortcut. On your keyboard, you'll notice the Q and W keys at the top left can be used to trim as well. So I'm pressing W, and everything from the playhead to the end of the clip has been removed. I'll just move the playhead out of the way so you can see I've also, though, removed a piece of the music. I'll undo, Control-Z or Command-Z on macOS, so you can see that again. I'm going to click a little bit further back, and again, I'm going to press W. And you can see, if I move the playhead out of the way, I've removed a piece of the voiceover and a piece of the music. So these Q and W keys, and the Q key removes the beginning of the clip, the W key removes the end of the clip. They're really useful, but they remove content from every track, which is not perfect if you've got multiple layers of audio in this way. But we can fix that. I'm going to undo again, and now I'm going to lock those audio tracks. Over on the left, in the track header, we've got a number of lock icons, one for each track. And I'm just going to turn these on for these 3 tracks that aren't used for the sync audio, the audio associated with my clips. Now, no changes can be made to these tracks. You'll notice if I click and drag anywhere here, I can't even touch the clips that are on the tracks. And let's try that again. I'm now going to press the W key, and you can see the audio is left alone. Again, I'll undo. Now I'm going to press the Q key. It's going to remove the beginning of the clip. And again, nothing happens to those other tracks. I'll just undo again. It's a good idea to make sure you unlock tracks that you've locked temporarily before you continue working on your edit, just to make sure that things work as you expect them to. There are other ways to trim, but many professional editors exclusively adjust the timing of their edits this way. For this lesson, I'm using the project file 0502 trim clips in the program monitor. And you'll find that project file in with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. If you want to get really precise with your trimming, you can use the trim mode in the program monitor. And let's take a look. If I single-click on the end of a clip, when I have this red arrow cursor, I get a trim handle. But if I double-click, the program monitor changes mode. This is the trim mode, and in this mode you can click directly into the picture to trim your clips. What's nice about this is that you have a large area to click on, and you can see I've got a red arrow anywhere in this image. I can drag, release the mouse, and I've trimmed. The right hand side of the screen's gone dark now because, of course, I've left a gap. I'm going to click and drag to the right, and you'll notice I haven't let go of the mouse yet. At the bottom of the program monitor, it says Trim Blocked on Video 1. That's because there's a clip in the way. When I release the mouse, you can see we actually filled the gap. And we can't trim any further because this forest shot is in the way. I'll just go back in by double-clicking on the end of this clip. And you'll notice I can drag on the right side of the program monitor as well. I actually think I trimmed the entire clip out of existence there. There's just a gap on the timeline. So I'm going to undo with Control-Z or Command-Z to bring it back. If I click on the middle between the 2 images in the program monitor, well, you can see that familiar cursor. As I drag, I'm adjusting both clips. Notice as well, if I now click on the left side of the program monitor, I've got a yellow arrow, not a red arrow. The yellow trim cursor indicates that it's going to be a ripple trim. I'll just click and drag, and you can see everything moves on the timeline. Let's try this with a longer clip. I'll double click to go into the trim mode, and up in the program monitor, I'll choose the rolling trim, and now I've got that yellow arrow on the left. You can see a dramatic change on the timeline. Everything moves to fill the gap. I'll just undo that again. You can switch trim modes in the program monitor by holding the Control key on Windows or the Command key on macOS while you click in the picture. There. Just under these images in the program monitor, we've got some precise adjustment controls. So here I can trim 1 frame at a time, or 5. I can also add frames. You can exit the trim mode by clicking anywhere in the background of the timeline. Here I'm clicking on a blank track. Editors develop a preference over time for one way of editing or another, and all approaches are valid. Sometimes you'll trim on the timeline, and sometimes you'll use the program monitor. As long as you get the results you want, you're fine. And you can always undo if you need to, so feel free to experiment. For this lesson, I'm using the project file 0503 sync locks and track locks. You'll find this project file with the media associated with this lesson. Just double-click the file to open it in Premiere Pro. While developing a sequence, it's easy to click on something and make a change and then realize later you'd wanted it left as it was. Premiere Pro includes 2 ways to keep things as they should be on the timeline, and they become more and more useful as your sequence becomes more complex. In this sequence, we've got a few tracks with some visuals. There's some video clips, there's even some titles. We've also got a couple of tracks with music and voiceover. If I trim this first clip, this great forest shot, using the Ripple Edit tool, all of the clips after it are going to move. Not the music clip, because it begins before the edit that I'm changing. I'm just going to undo this. I can lock the tracks that I want to protect when I trim by clicking on these lock icons. But then I've got a problem, because if I drag to adjust the timing of this edit, I'm leaving behind these voiceover clips that I do want to move with my shots. So I'll just undo. I need these voiceover clips to move with my visuals, but I'm happy for the timing of the music to change. So I'm going to unlock the Audio 3 track, and now when I trim, these voiceover clips move as well. The reason why the voiceover clips are moving at the same time as my video clips is because of an additional feature called sync locks. Here's the toggle sync lock button for the Audio 3 track. I'm just going to undo, everything moves back, and I'm going to turn off the sync lock for Audio 3. And now when I drag to adjust the timing of this edit, the voiceover clips stay where they are. You'll notice that the audio for the 1 or 2 clips in the sequence attached to a video clip will always move because it's a linked audio clip. Here, this Temple from the Ground linked clip will always move with its audio, unless of course linked selection is turned off in the timeline. For this lesson, I'm working with the 0601 Basic Correction Options Premiere Pro project file. You can find this with the media associated with this lesson. Just double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. Once you have the timing of your edited sequence just right, it's likely you'll want to adjust the appearance of your clips. There are a wealth of special effects available in Premiere Pro, but we're going to focus on the Lumetri color panel. The first clip in this Ninja Sonic sequence is a little dark. I'm going to switch to the color workspace, and this brings up the Lumetri color panel. If it doesn't, just be sure to click on the panel menu here in the workspace panel and choose Reset to save layout. In the color workspace, clips are selected automatically when the timeline playhead moves over them. See, as I drag across here, each clip is highlighted. This is based on the track selection buttons. That's this column here where the track names are. And it's worth noting that these are distinct from the buttons to the left, which are the available source selection buttons. Going back to this first clip, all I need to do to brighten this up is drag the exposure slider to the right. You've got more subtle controls available here, but very often just moving the exposure slider will fix these kinds of simple issues. The fourth clip in the sequence, this interview 1 shot, has a pretty strong tint. I can see just by eye that there's too much magenta in this shot, so to fix it I'm going to drag the tint slider over towards the green, and that does a pretty good job. You'll notice that each section in the Lumetri color panel, here you see we've got basic correction, creative, curves, and so on, has a checkbox to enable or disable it. So if I disable the basic correction, you can see the original state of the clip, and if I enable it, you can see the result after I've adjusted the settings. This is pretty useful to compare the before and after. I'm going to reset this tint control by double-clicking on it. That sets it back to the default of 0. And now I'm going to use this eyedropper to automatically adjust the color. I've clicked once to select the tool, and now I'm going to look for something white, like the lettering on this t-shirt. But before I click, I'm going to hold down the control key here on Windows. This would be the command key on Mac OS. And you can see when I do that, I get a larger eyedropper. This means Premiere Pro will take a 5 by 5 pixel sample, getting me an average of the colors. And this will often give you a more accurate result, particularly if you're working with noisy footage. I'm going to click, and automatically you can see we've got a better result, and both the temperature and tint sliders have been adjusted. I have a second sequence in this project, travelogue sequence. It's here in the bin as well. And the last shot in this sequence is a little bit flat. It doesn't have very much contrast. So I'm going to fix this again in the Lumetri color panel by dragging the contrast slider to the right. And that looks pretty good. If I drag this all the way over, you'll notice that we begin to get some crushed colors, which might be a desired look. It looks a little bit more filmic perhaps, but on this occasion I'm going to pull it back a little to get something a little more natural looking. Now that I'm happy with the adjustments I've made, I'm going to go back to the editing workspace and continue with my project. There are a few other clips in this project you can experiment with, and of course there are several categories of controls in the Lumetri color panel. Ultimately, the measure is whether you're happy with the results. For this lesson, I am using the 0602 Apply a Look to Your Clips Premiere Pro project file. You'll find this project file with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. There are broadly two kinds of color adjustment you'll make to your clips: color corrections and creative looks. You might correct the colors in two clips so they match, then separately adjust the appearance to make the clips look more filmic. I'm going to switch to the color workspace, and I'm interested to work on this arch far clip in the travelogue sequence in this project. And in fact, I want to compare the original version of the clip with the version that I'm working on. So in the project panel, I'm going to expand this media bin and double-click to open the arch far shot in the source monitor. Remember, selection is really important in Premiere Pro. So now that I've opened this up in the source monitor, I'm going to go back to the timeline and single-click to select the timeline instance of the clip. It's that instance of the clip that we want to work on. I've also already increased the size of the Lumetri color panel. I just clicked on the boundary at the edge of the panel and dragged it out so I have more access to the controls. And I'm going to go to the creative section of the panel. In this section, we have a number of pre-built looks that you can apply to your clips to achieve a subtle, nuanced color correction adjustment. We have a look menu that lists all of the built-in looks as text, but I'm really interested to work with this preview browser. On the right side of the preview is an arrow, and I can click on this to browse through a few of the built-in looks. If you like a look that you see, you can click on the picture to apply it to the clip. I should note that these looks are really intended to add that nuanced adjustment rather than to correct problems with your clips. But you can combine these looks with other adjustments in the Lumetri color panel. Here I'm going to go back to the basic correction section, and I think I'm going to lift up the exposure a little, maybe push up the contrast, pull down the shadows, lift the highlights, and you can continue working until you're happy with the combined result. When you've finished making your color adjustments, you can go back to the editing workspace to continue working on your project. It can be fun experimenting with looks, and they can bring your work to the next level with just a few clicks. It's worth taking the time to try all of them to get a feel for the results you can achieve. For this lesson, I'm working with the 0603 Creative Adjustments Premiere Pro project file. You'll find this project file with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. In addition to pre-built looks, there are lots of controls you can experiment with to change the appearance of your clips. There's no right or wrong approach here, and sometimes the best way to get the look you want is by trying an extreme and then toning it down. Let's try it. I'm looking in this Ninja Sonic sequence, and I'm going to go to the Color workspace. I'm interested in making adjustments to this Interview 2A clip. It's worth noting that adjustments made using the Lumetri color panel are added to clips as a visual effect that appears in the Effect Controls panel. Here in the Lumetri color panel, I'm in the Basic Correction section, and I'm going to make some adjustments. I'll increase the exposure on this shot, push up the contrast, maybe I'll pull down the shadows and the darker black pixels and the brighter white pixels, and that just gives the shot a feeling of greater depth. Maybe I'll even warm the shot up a little bit too. If I go to the Effect Controls panel, which is usually in the same frame as the source monitor, there's our Lumetri color effect on the list. If I want to, I can select this heading, as I have now, and copy it and paste it to other clips, or in fact multiple other clips, using standard copy and paste controls. And I'll try that in a moment. Before I do, notice that if I want to, with this effect selected in the Effect Controls panel, I can hit the Delete key and it's gone. I'm going to undo that by pressing Ctrl-Z on Windows here, and that would be Command-Z on macOS. So let's apply this effect to some other clips. I'm going to select the effect heading, and if I want to, I can right-click and choose Copy, but I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut. Here on Windows, I'm going to press Ctrl-C. That would be Command-C on macOS. And now if I scroll along a little in this sequence, I have 3 more clips I'd like to apply this adjustment to. I'm going to make a marquee selection, just overlapping the clips so they're highlighted, and you'll notice that I can no longer see the controls in the Effect Controls panel. In fact, I just get this information, multiple clips selected. Remember, you can only see the controls for a single clip at a time. But that won't stop me applying the effect to these 3 clips. I'm going to press the standard keyboard shortcut for paste. That's Ctrl-V on Windows or Command-V on macOS. And you probably saw there, as I pressed the keys, this effect badge lit up to show that there's an effect applied. I'm going to undo that again with Ctrl or Command-Z, and I'm going to show you another way of achieving the same result. This clip has the effect applied as I want it, so I'm going to right-click and I'm going to choose Copy. I could, of course, just press Ctrl or Command-C as well. Now I'm going to select these 3 clips, and I'm going to right-click and choose Paste Attributes. This allows me to apply settings from one clip to another clip or to multiple clips, and you've got a lot of control over the kinds of settings that are applied. In this case, I want the clips to match exactly, so I don't need to deselect any of these options. I can just click OK. All 3 clips have the same effect applied. When you're happy with the color adjustments you've made, go back to the editing workspace and you can continue working on your project. This is a quick way to use creative work applied to one clip to change the appearance of many clips. There are shortcuts, of course, and long cuts. That's a slower workflow that gives you more control, but the results are the same. For this lesson, I'm working with the 0604 Color Wheels Premiere Pro project file. You'll find this with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click on the project file to open it in Premiere Pro. Color wheels allow you to make color adjustments to just the dark or the light areas of an image. The extra control can help you fix more subtle problems in clips and add more nuance to a look you're creating. Let's try it. I'm switching to the Color workspace, and in the Lumetri color panel, I'm switching to view the color wheels section. I'm looking at the travelogue sequence in this project, and I'm going to single click in the timeline panel on this walking on sands clip to make sure it's selected. In the Lumetri color panel, I have 3 separate color wheels. One for the shadows, that's the dark pixels, one for the midtones, and one for the highlights, that's the bright pixels in the image. The blue sky in this clip is around about the midtones, so as I hover the mouse cursor over this midtones color wheel, you can see a control puck appears. That's that little plus symbol in the middle. And I'm going to drag that towards the blue side of the color wheel. And right away you can see the result. I've got a stronger blue color in that sky. I'm going to use the highlights control to add some warmth to the sand, which is in the brighter pixels. You'll notice that the control pucks move very slowly, and this is by design. It helps you to apply a more nuanced result. Now let's take a look at another example. I'm going to the Ninja Sonic sequence. If this isn't open on your screen, you'll find it in the project panel. And I'm going to take a look at this 4th clip, which already has an effect applied. I can see that because it's got the effects badge lit up in purple. I'm going to remove that effect by single clicking on the clip to select it, and I'm going to go to the Effect Controls panel. I'm going to select the effect and press delete. Now, again, with that clip selected, I'm single clicking to make sure it's selected in the timeline panel. I'm going back to the Lumetri color panel, and I'm going to adjust just the midtones. I can see by eye that there's a magenta color cast on this clip, so I'm going to move the control puck away from that color. And very quickly, you see we get a more natural looking result. Fixing a color cast in this way by just adjusting the midtones means that you can still have some color in the shadows and the highlights if it's there, and this can give you a more interesting result. You'll notice that there are sliders next to each of these color wheels, and these allow you to make the shadow, midtone, and highlight areas in the picture brighter or darker. I'm going to pull down the shadows and lift up the highlights. And I suppose this is just a more subtle way of adjusting the contrast in the picture. Now I'm happy with the result. I'm going to go back to the editing workspace to continue working on my project. You'll tend to get the best results if you experiment a little, pushing the colors too far and then coming back to get a more natural result. Once you're familiar with the color wheels, you're on your way to mastering color adjustments in Adobe Premiere Pro. For this lesson, I'm working with the Premiere Pro project file 0701 Add Transition Effects. You'll find that project file with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. Whenever a shot changes to another shot, it's called a transition. The most common transition is a cut, where one clip ends and the next clip begins immediately after it. You also might choose to use special effect transitions, and there are lots to choose from, including the most popular for video, the dissolve, and the crossfade for sound. And let's try this. I've got a cut here between the kids rolling a tire shot and this forest time-lapse. Let's take a quick look at that cut. I'm going to click back on the timeline and play.
To the people of the corn who built.
It looks okay as a cut, but I think it'd be interesting to put a cross dissolve in. I'm going to just resize the project panel slightly so we can see the tab for the effects panel, and I'm going to browse into video transitions and dissolve, and now I'm going to drag this cross dissolve effect onto the join between these two clips. And before I release the mouse, you can see that I've got a highlight showing where the effect is going to be dropped. I can position this at the beginning of the second clip, in the middle, or at the end of the first. And you'll notice that these durations differ slightly, and that's because there's more leftover material for that kids rolling a tire shot than there is for the forest time-lapse shot. And these transition effects are applied by using the unused media. I'll release the mouse button, and there's our cross dissolve. Let's take a look.
To the people of the corn who built.
Perfect. You can adjust the timing of a transition effect by dragging the edges, just as you would trim a clip. I can make this shorter
People of the corn.
And I can move the timing. If I have the transition effect selected, when I look in the Effect Controls panel, I get the settings for that transition, not for the clips, but for the transition itself. And you can see the controls are pretty basic. I can turn on viewing the actual sources up here in the preview. I can specify an alignment and a specific duration. I also get a preview in the right-hand side of the Effect Controls panel that I can use to modify the timing. More complex effects will have more advanced controls, but this is all we need for the cross dissolve. I'm going to make sure the transition effect is selected in the timeline panel, and I'm going to press delete to remove it. Now let's take another transition effect, maybe a wipe, and I'm going to drag this onto the join between the arch far and time-lapse C clips. And you'll notice that I can only drop the transition effect on the beginning of the time-lapse C clip. And that's because there's no leftover media at all for that clip. I'm just going to undo for a second so I can show you something. You'll notice that the top left corner of the time-lapse C clip has a tiny white triangle. You can see here between the fog time-lapse and kids rolling a tire clip, we've got a triangle on either side of the cut too. That triangle indicates that it's the last frame of the clip. There's no leftover media, and so we can't apply a transition effect that involves any kind of overlap. We could fix this by trimming the clip, so there's some unused media, but I'm not too worried for now. Let's put that radial wipe on, and maybe I'll adjust the timing to make it a little shorter. As you can see in the Effect Controls panel, now I've got the radial wipe selected, we have a few more options. If you're happy with the timing of a transition effect, you can replace the effect and keep that setting. Here, for example, I'm going to go to the iris category. I'll get the iris diamond and drop it right on top of that radial wipe. I'm selecting the effect, and you can see that iris diamond effect has inherited the duration and timing. Let's take a look.
In jungles.
It's a good idea to experiment with the many transition effects available, though most professional editors will advise caution. If the transitions begin to distract from the story, you may want to keep things simple. For this lesson, I'm working with the project file 0702 Add Visual Effects. You'll find this project file with the media associated with this lesson. Just double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. As well as transition effects, there are many visual effects available, some with more practical and some with more creative results. You apply all standard effects in the same way. Let's find out how. I'm working here with a sequence called Going Home. We've got a lot of great visuals, and in particular at the beginning of the sequence we've got a simple title in the foreground and a shot of a forest in the background. I'll just play a little section of this so you can see what's going on. I think it'd be interesting if we could make the background shot behind the title a little blurry. That'll help to focus the audience's attention on the titles. I'm going to the Effects panel, and I'm expanding Video Effects and Blur and Sharpen, and I've got a number of blur effects available. I want to draw your attention in particular to some of these markings next to the effects. The first one on the left, this Go Faster arrow, indicates that your graphics card can do the work of playing back the visual effect. The end result is that it's a little bit quicker and you won't need to pre-render or pre-process the effect to see it. If this icon is grayed out on your system, it's because you don't have the kind of graphics card that can accelerate playback in that way. Don't worry, the result is the same, but you'll need to press the Enter key on your keyboard to prepare the shot for playback if you want to see it on your computer screen. At the top of the Effects panel, there's a search box, and in fact, if I collapse this Video Effects category and click into the search box and type the word blur, all of the effects that contain that name are displayed. It's a quick way to find an effect if you know the name and don't want to browse for it. I'm going to drag the Gaussian blur onto this clip, and you can see the effects badge lights up to show an effect has been applied. And nothing's going to happen to the clip initially because, like most effects, the Gaussian blur effect doesn't make changes until you set them. You may decide that you prefer to use a different blur, and the only way to find out is to experiment with them. Anyway, for now, I'm going to go to the Effects workspace, And this is going to put the effects panel over on the right, along with a number of other panels I might want to work with, and it's going to open up the effect controls panel on the left. The focus here is very much on the clips on the timeline that I'm working with. With the clip selected on the timeline, I can see the effect controls for that clip, including this Gaussian blur I just applied. I'm going to drag on the number here for the blurriness, and notice that every control here has a reset button. If I click, this goes back to 0. I'll just undo that with Control Z here on Windows. That'll be Command Z on Mac OS. And you'll notice there's some darkening around the edges of the frame here. That's a consequence of the way blurs are calculated. I can get rid of that by turning on the Repeat Edge Pixels option. Of course, different effects have different options, and these options are fairly simple. But whichever effect you apply, you're going to find all of the controls here inside the Effect Controls panel. If I want to remove the effect, I can select it and press Delete. And of course, I can restore that by undoing, by pressing Control Z here on Windows or Command Z on Mac OS. It's easy to remove effects, so it's safe to try as many as you like before deciding on the final result. I'll play a little bit. And I think that works. I'm going to go back to the editing workspace and carry on working on my project. With so many effects to choose from and so many third-party effects you can install, it might take time to decide on your favorites. Now that you know how to add, adjust and remove effects, the best thing to do is try others and decide if you like the results. For this lesson, I'm working with the Premiere Pro project file 0703 stabilizer clip. You'll find that project file with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. While many of the visual effects are creative, some help you deal with problem footage. A classic example is shaky camera work. Premiere Pro has an effect that will often solve this problem quickly and easily, the warp stabilizer effect. Let's check it out. I've got a shot in the project panel here, Clock Shakes. I'm going to double-click to open it up, and let's take a look at this playing back. Well, it's a nice shot, but it's definitely very shaky. I'm just going to take the video part of this clip into my sequence by dragging the film strip icon under the monitor. And I'm going to put this down on the timeline over the kids rolling a tire shot. Because snapping is on my timeline, this is going to jump into position at the beginning of the clip and replace it. And there it is. I'm going to the effects panel, and I'm going to type in the search box the word warp. That lets me quickly find the warp stabilizer effect, and I'm going to drag this onto the clip. Premiere Pro begins analyzing the clip in the background, and if I go to the Effect Controls panel, you can see the frame count as it goes through that analysis. Once the analysis is complete, we can take a look at the result.
De mis raíces. To the people of...
That's a massive improvement, with no need to make adjustments to the settings. Over in the Effect Controls panel, I do have a few ways to change the results that we get from this effect. But what I'm really interested in right now is this result menu, where I can change the option from the default of smooth motion to no motion. You may notice the clip has zoomed in just slightly further than before, and that's to allow the movement to be fully compensated for. Let's take a look at this new version.
De mis raíces. To the people.
Fantastic. Not all footage will have enough visual cues for the warp stabilizer to work with, but this can be a quick lifesaver when working with roughly shot handheld footage that you would prefer to be smooth. For this lesson, I'm working with the project file 0704 Create Effect Presets. You'll find that project file with the media associated with this lesson. Double-click on it to open it in Premiere Pro. Once you're happy with the settings for an effect you've applied, you might want to save those settings for use on other clips as a preset. You can do this easily and reuse the preset on different clips, in different sequences, and even in different projects. At the beginning of this going home sequence, I have a clip called Great Forest with a blur effect on it. You can see it here in the background with this title in front. If I go to the Effect Controls panel, I can see the blurriness is set to 23 and the Repeat Edge Pixels option is on. I want to make this a bit more visible so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to click on this number and type in 40 so it's extra blurry. I'm going to right-click on the Gaussian blur in the Effect Controls panel and I'm going to choose Save Preset. You'll want to give this effect preset a name that you can easily remember. I'll call this First Blur. And click OK. Now if I go to my Effect panel, which is just tucked away here in the same frame as the Project panel, and look in my Presets category, there's the effect. Now I'm going to drag the navigator over to the end of this sequence and line up my playhead, and let's apply that preset to the last clip. You'll notice that last clip has a dissolve effect already applied between the two sections of the same clip, creating a transition to the blur effect. Let's take a look at that. Now, if I'm happy to keep the blur preset as it is, that's fine. If I'd like to get rid of it, there's a button at the bottom of the Effects panel that I can use to delete it. But you can also combine multiple effects into a single preset. And notice up in the Effect Controls panel, First Blur, the name of my preset, is in brackets after the name of the effect. That's just an easy way to remember the preset that you've used. With this last clip selected, I'm going to go to the Motion Controls in the Effect Controls panel, and I'm going to scale this down to about 85%, something like that, just to give it a border. Now I want to combine this Gaussian blur effect with the motion effect that has that scale adjustment applied. And to do this, I'm going to hold down here in Windows the Control key and on macOS the Command key to make a multiple selection in the Effect Controls panel. With those two effect headings selected, I can right-click, I can choose Save Preset, and let's call this Blur and Scale, and I'll click OK. Now you can see this combined effect preset in my effects panel, and just so you can see it, I'll choose another clip and I'll apply that preset to it. I'm just dragging and dropping, and right away you can see we've got the blur and the scale adjustment, and with that clip selected in the Effect Controls panel, we can see there's that 85% scale adjustment and there's that Gaussian blur. These presets are not fixed. They just preset the settings for a particular effect, speeding up the configuration of the effect. I can adjust this scale property, for example, and perhaps even reduce the blurriness. Effect presets allow you to become more efficient without restricting your creativity. Anytime you feel you might use an effect in a particular way often, make a preset.